Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Pitstick at soulproof.com. We're talking about suicide and the spiritual ramifications of that. We're in the middle of talking about a number of different situations where a person may commit suicide, and I'm not condoning the act, I'm not encouraging it. Usually I don't think it's the highest path. I am saying, though, the evidence presents it's not an unforgivable sin, and I can understand why people in different situations would take their own lives. Certainly Creator does as well. So one is, if a person's lived a lie, especially been in an abusive or loveless relationship for years. When I was a suicide prevention counselor in Columbus, Ohio, in my 20s, going to theology school, I would man the phone lines and people would call in, especially elderly females, and they would say, I haven't loved my husband, he hasn't loved me for 40 years, but we stuck together because that's what our church teaches. And these people were so dead inside, it's almost like their insides were eaten out, and they would be suicidal. And by the way, the prognosis for talking these people out of it was pretty low because they were just at such a desperate point. Financial losses, for example, you may have seen pictures of people jumping off skyscrapers in the Great Depression in the early 30s. That's one situation where a person may feel like there's no hope and they should just end it all. If a person's severely disabled, quadriplegic, I know one friend, older friend, whose husband was a powerful lawyer, a PI attorney, and he was injured and quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. Had one of those chairs that he could work with his breath, and he was searching for a swimming pool where he could do some rehab, where people could work with him and limbering up his limbs, ostensibly. So he went to visit this pool, and the director of the pool got called away, and when he came back, the guy was in the bottom of the pool in the deep end and had blown his way off the edge of the pool, and found out later that was his plan all along, to do that eventually. So who can judge? Who can judge that one? If people are in chronic, intractable pain, I know I'm not very good with pain. I can imagine being in horrible, severe pain year after year, decade after decade, and at some point more than a person could take. So again, these are some tricky issues, but I know that the divine understands better than we can all the ramifications. So it appears then that depending on what the circumstances were, that affects what the person's life is like when they pass on. For example, there was a New York couple, elderly New York couple in their 80s. She had severe Alzheimer's. He found out he had cancer, terminal cancer. And so they knew there was no good answer. And so they said, rather than spend our life savings with caretakers and care at the end of our lives, they gave it all to their church, and they turned on their gas stove and died from carbon monoxide poisoning. That can be understood in a certain sense. So that would be a sort of suicide where a person would need some healing when they pass over, but there wouldn't be, I think, the disappointment as would happen if a person just kills themselves at the first tough thing that comes up. But again, who can see all these factors? And that's why it's important to know, bottom line, it's not an unforgivable sin, it's not an end. And we'll talk more about some of the outcomes for people who take their own lives, what we've learned from the soul-proof evidence and research. So be sure to visit soulproof.com, free articles about that. We'll be right back.